Hi, everybody. I'm James. With me, I have Leon and Dianna today. This is In the Room with Communitas North America. We really hope that this time is a time where we get to kind of present who Communitas North America is a little bit better, what we're about. We also hope that it is a time where we get to just explore like what mission and faith community looks like in our present world. And lastly, we really hope that this is a time that is encouraging and inspiring for us as well as everybody joining us.
Yeah, and I'm excited about today's conversation, James, because we have a good friend, Dianna McCarton. I've known Dianna for as long as I've been in Communitas. I think one of my first encounters was being on a panel with Dianna at the Chicago Connect quite a while ago, when we were talking about justice, and really have always been impressed with her work in St. Paul and the things that she's doing with friends who are experiencing homelessness. And so I'm really excited we get a chance to talk about the work that she's doing, hear her passion, and really tie it into the topic last week where we were talking about embedding and initiating in a community and how we get to know the people that God is calling us on mission to be with, and then how we present a gospel witness, that we present the good news to the people that we are connecting with. So Dianna, it's good to have you on the program. Could you tell us a little bit about like your history with Communitas and how you got involved and kind of what brought you to where you're at now?
Sure. And thanks for having me, guys. You guys hear that? Oh, that was on my end. Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
No.
And my phone resting on the board here.
Huh.
So I've been involved with Communitas International since 2009. All right. So 13 years we're going on. It was an interesting way it all came about. I was neighbors with Kevin and Kathy Johnson, and Kevin is now in senior leadership of Communitas International, and was friends with them when they ended up moving over to the Netherlands to pastor Communitas church plant there. And through the course of my friendship with them, I got to hear all the cool things Communitas International is doing. And then two, out of that, they shared with me a conference that they had been to in which Michael Frost and Alan Hirsch had been present. And they were, as a community, the organization was going through one of the books those two guys had authored called The Shape of Things to Come. At the same time all that was going on, I, on my own in the States, had been called by the Lord to pastor a church and was in seminary and was wrestling in a lot of ways about this call, because two things were going on. One, I, for example, would drive down a street, any given street, and I'd see a church of one denomination on one side of the street and a church of another denomination on the other side of the street. And I'd quickly think about all the spent resources to keep those two buildings going. And what a shame it was to have that kind of division of denominations going, even though it's still a Christian church. Not, that's a whole other discussion about whether that's good or bad. I'm just sharing with you the struggles I was having about having this call from the Lord, and then what to do with my ecclesiology with all that. What is church supposed to look like? My job even today is in the corporate world in finance and banking. And through those relationships in my working life, I had a lot of powerful opportunities to share the good news with coworkers of mine, just through the working partnerships or times we spend together on lunch, etc. And so I could see God using me in powerful ways outside the church. Okay. So I'm trying to wrestle with all this as I'm finishing up SEM. When I got a hold of the book, The Shape of Things to Come, it was like all my answers were put right in front of me. That book speaks a lot about these organic, missional communities that all look different throughout the world, but are centered on the person of Jesus. And so they gather around the heart's desire to want to know more about Jesus, but they don't in any way fit any kind of church in a box, denominational, here's how you start church kind of a thing. These communities are formed, which, as we see, the same thing going on with Communitas International, but these communities are formed around, well, what's God doing in this context? What is drawing people together? What is working with that, with that leader? Where do they have impact in the world? And what are their heart's cries to care for others in a missional way? And of course, we know that can look very different. There's a lot of ways that can look. And so the freedom to kind of break free of the standard church in a box and to see that the things that were laid on my heart when I felt God calling me to pastor a church were not the things I was seeing driving down the streets, but were in fact working across the world in the examples provided in the Shape of Things to Come book. And then as I come to realize through Communitas International and a lot of the partner churches that were going on. So that's how I plugged in right away, reached out to the North American director at the time, shared with him my heart's cry to start something here in Minnesota, and just got plugged in from there.
Cool.
Dianna, one of the things we wanted to hear from you on this morning or this afternoon, evening, was about some of the work that you are doing with people living on the streets. Could you share with us just like what led you to start pursuing relationships with people living on the streets? What that journey looked like a little bit?
So when we first started, and just to clarify so people don't get confused as they start talking, my church, the organization I lead, is called Communitas Twin Cities. And I always have to laugh and say this, we had the name first. But so it's, it works great. Communitas International, but we had, before Communitas International had taken that name, we were already Communitas Twin Cities. So, so as I say that, if I don't say Communitas International, I'm talking about Communitas Twin Cities. If I just say Communitas. So, when Communitas started, after I kind of felt the freedom to do that after the book and realizing the kind of non-traditional churches that were happening in the world, we started out as a group of people who did mission first. So before we even met in any kind of a house church setting or anything, we did serve events because I wanted that to be our core. And at the time, and for probably the first 2.5 years, we did a variety of things where we served the community. Could have been Feed My Starving Children. A lot of times we would partner with other small ministries that we knew needed help. Where one example is a community that worked with non-privileged youth, at-risk youth. And they at the time had an Amazon bookstore, so they sold books, and that was kind of a job skills program for these youth. And so we would go around to neighborhoods and we would ask for donations of books. If books people didn't want anymore. That was one example. Another ministry partnered with fed They were called, it's called Jesus Kitchen. It's been a while. And we partnered with them. So they went and they served meals out of the parking lot of a local shelter. So we worked with them where we helped serve the meals. And so there was a variety of different things that we did for those 2.5 years. And then we realized we were hungering for more. We were hungering to build relationships with the people that we were serving. And it's just time to kind of step out in that way and get community formed. And so we met together as a group, this group of volunteers, and we talked about what are the things that our hearts were most passionate about. And we all unanimously said people without homes. That was what we really felt led to be a part of and to focus our serving on. So then we shifted to that. I'm working entirely with that community. For a number of years, 5 years or so, we partnered with a different ministry that had a food truck. They let us use their food truck, and we prepared and served meals off the food truck on a random corner on the west side of St. Paul. And then most recently, over the last 3 years, we now have come inside. So all those years we did the food truck, whether we had the food truck or not, there was, probably 7 years, 7.5 years in there total. We met outside, snow, rain, whatever it was.
Wow.
We met outside on this little sidewalk area that had a little grassy knoll by it. And it was really cool actually to be doing that. We miss it in some ways, but about 2.5 years ago, we decided to find something inside because we realized, I'm going to back into this a little bit, but one of our events once a year is we would host a dinner inside a banquet room of a local restaurant where everyone could come in and have a really nice sit down meal. And when we did that, we realized how much more community we could build and how much more engaging people were when we weren't worried about the road noise outside. We weren't about the rain falling on us, etc. People could just kind of relax a little bit more and just sit down when we were sheltered. When we were sheltered and meeting. Okay, so we said, we got to get inside so we can go deep. So for the last 2.5 years, we rented a space out of a local church. So that's kind of the story how we got there, but that's the story how we geared ourselves, focused on working with unsheltered people, which is an entirely different community than who we are as volunteers. We're all middle class, corporate, suburban living folks. Yeah.
Thanks, Dianna. I thought a question that'd be fun to ask you was, what have you been surprised by as you've developed friendships with people living on the streets?
It's an absolutely beautiful thing that I never expected. These guys are really open to relationship, and they trusted us rather quickly. Community formed. The community is chaotic, goes with the territory, but community is there. That makes sense. We do a lot of surveys like, what do you like most about coming to attend our gatherings? And because we give out bus cards and there's just different things, and hands down the response is the community. That's how they respond. They really like the community. So the impact of these folks being known and having a place where they're known and loved, if that makes sense, probably almost in a family sense in a lot of ways. So the community is just formed really fast. Inhibitions that other people typically have, they're not as strong. The inhibitions were lower, which is great. And then the gratefulness. I've served in a lot of different arenas, and sometimes you can bump into some entitlement and some other things, but there's a real profound gratefulness with this community that, and you don't need it. You don't need to hear that back, but the fact that they give it, I think it's just a beautiful thing of God at work, where we can just show those kinds of emotions and let those guards down to show, even gratefulness. Yeah, I think those are the things that have surprised me the most.
Thanks, Dianna.
Yeah.
So Dianna, we in Communitas, we talk about, initiating a gospel witness or sharing good news. And as you were connecting with the people living on the streets in St. Paul and then building this community, how did you discern what it looked like to apply the gospel or good news among the friends who were living on the street?
Yeah. I think there's like two different ways, maybe three. The first one was, this won't be surprising to anyone. You go in to listen. You don't go into with your ideas. You go in to listen and really get to see and understand the community that you're engaging with, because as I explained earlier, this is a completely different community than the typical people any of us hang around with, or have had relationships with. So there's a very submissive posture there, and a learning and receptive posture. I also, and I say this quite often um, to my leadership team, so because I know this about my own weakness. So I'm corporate skilled minded, however you want to look at that. And there's ways we could go in and we could build the church. We could have our own ideas of how to build something. We all know how to do stuff like that, right? And go in and just make it happen. But and then with the leadership team, I constantly share this. So as we are planning things, we take this posture. And here's the posture that we are part of Jesus birthing something. We are not building anything. And so the posture constantly is, what is Jesus birthing? What do we observe him doing? And how do we join in that? So that we are not running ahead of him. You know what I mean? We are either walking alongside him or kind of following as he leads us. And so the horizon of where are we going to be in 2 years from now? I don't do that to myself. I do that all the time in my other things of life, but I don't do it here, because then I'm going to run ahead of the Lord. So it's more of a shorter time frame that I look at. What is God doing right now, and how do we join in that and move that with that? So that's the posture that we've established. And then when you look at the life of Jesus, if you just imagine that Jesus is with you, with whatever community you're with, and this is what we do with, Communitas Twin Cities, what would he want? What would he want that community to know if he were there? What are the things about his kingdom and his good news that are really applicable to folks that are in that kind of situation? Which some things are obviously applicable universally, but some things are more of a heart's cry depending on the various situations you're in. You are never alone. Loaves and fishes, that's been a big one, that God takes little and makes much with it. Loving your neighbor, and this is an environment where it's easy to get really frustrated waiting in lines all the time, or people trying to butt in lines, or people trying to steal from you, and there's just a lot of different things going on. And so just what are the things that you sense the Lord would want these folks to know? And another one too is just that the kingdom is for you. Like around Easter, we did the teaching on the veil being torn when Jesus dies on the cross, and how that's available to us all. And that was just extremely powerful for our group to, some already knew that, but just some didn't. And so, yeah, that's just how I tried to discern it, and how to speak to them as I sense God's leading us to speak to them. But it is teaching in Christ's teachings, and he gives us, for this community, he gives us so many examples of what it looks like to share the good news with folks in these situations, because that was one of his biggest heart's cry. One of the biggest things he did is, reached out to the one society turned away from, and welcomed them in, and had helped them to know that they weren't any less than.
Wow, that is all beautiful
Yeah.
stuff there.
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying about discerning. It's just really, that's not our nature. We always want to come in with our plan. And
oh yeah. And just don't do that, because that's what God will have. Yeah.
Cool. So the Bible, talks about loving people in word. Oh, go ahead. Oh, yeah.
Sorry. I was just going to add one other thing. I don't stand up.
Go ahead, Dianna.
Yeah, I wanted to share, this is another thing, the traditional way of how we teach, in the context of our missional church gatherings. I don't stand up and preach. It's a discussion that we have. I'll put out something, a biblical truth, and then we have discussion times around it. And I really open up, it's scarier doing that. It's a lot easier to just get up and give a message, and you don't get any feedback, right? But if you just start giving the message and then you allow for all this feedback right away, and and maybe a little more even in this context, but I'll get some wild thoughts coming back, and but it's okay, because to share, right? And how do I say this? It's okay, because we're all there to learn, and it's not so hard to just, no matter what the thoughts are that are shared, then you just share back, as was, you understand, what the Bible means by this, or what the truth is here. And there's just no harm, no foul in it, but it's a much more open way of doing the discussion than just preaching at them. I don't use 4-syllable words, right? I don't use big words to share, and we don't need to, but be mindful of your audiences, I guess what I'm saying. Yeah. No, that's all. I just wanted to share that.
I think this brings up a good question of how have you guys developed a unique expression of church that fits the community that's grown around you?
So, and I don't know if this is what you're looking for on the answer. I'd go back to that whole birthing thing, as far as we just went in with the love of Christ. We used a meal to gather around.
Yeah.
And there's also the practicality of you meet physical needs first, and then we just kind of discerned, meeting by meeting, what was working with the community.
Yeah.
Here's an example of something. So this happened last year. This will show you that we're not perfect and we're still learning. So we've been doing, we've been gathering like this with this community for what, 7 years or so, probably a little longer. But last year it was Mother's Day, and we had planned these flowers and these candy bars that we were going to give all the females in the community. And one of our male members comes in, and the candy bars are kind of set aside, but he saw them and he went to grab one. And we're like, no, 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 those are for I'm so ashamed of this. No, 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 those are for our Mother's Day gifts. Well, he was a little upset about it, but he put the candy bar back down, and some events happened later on in the gathering, and then we were serving the meal, and he had torn into it so viciously, the meal, that we just knew something's up. Well, it turned out he hadn't eaten. He hadn't eaten for like 24 hours when he came. And here we were locked into our little plan of serving these candy bars, and these flowers to the females, but we had someone come in that was super hungry, right? So we learned from that, and now we have water and snacks available for anyone when they come in while we're doing everything else. So that if you're coming in really that hungry, we have something for you until the meal's served. That's just one example of figuring out how to build community, in the context. Was there more that you're looking for on that, James?
No, I think you kind of were starting to go down that road when you were talking about using a discussion forum and not just assaulting people with academic language.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, I just think that's such an important part of the conversation we're having is it's we should be growing churches that fit the people that the church is growing among. Yeah. And it goes back to that, we shouldn't be so married to the model that we aren't caring for the people well.
Yeah, exactly. Right, because a lot of the things that we do just go against my other volunteers, just natural way of doing things, but it's what is needed and what works in that context, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of, what's the word I want to say? Maybe it's humble. Maybe it's a sense of humility. Maybe it's I don't want to be cliche about this, but you really are just dying to self. All right, Lord, here I am, blank slate. How do you want to use me? And just kind of set back all your ideas of what you think you should bring and be in tune with what the community is saying. They can be simple things. We serve apples, and then we realize half our community doesn't have the teeth to eat apples, so don't serve apples anymore. We were giving out bus cards, and the bus cards are great that we distribute, but there are a few people that have cars. So, not all our community lives on the streets, and that ebbs and flows based on the economy, also based on, we're in Ramsey County of St. Paul, and Ramsey County did a great push during COVID to get many, many, many people that were living in tents off the streets and in shelters. And so there's a big change from people that are living outside to living inside. But a good portion of our community is unsheltered, in that is homeless, in that they don't have their own home, but they do have a shelter they can go to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, so a few people had cars. Well, then maybe we should be getting gas cards for those guys instead of bus cards. They don't, need the bus card, kind of a thing. And so different shifts like that. There's been a couple other examples where, because of the reading abilities for a lot of people, I realized that a lot of times visuals work really, really good. So I've shifted to do things a lot visually, because even talking sometimes, you're your ability to absorb and process information, that might not be as strong. And so, but a visual can work really good to speaking with people. So it's just a variety of things of really knowing your audience and being willing to do non-conventional things. Yeah.
Yes, Diana. I think that answered the question very well.
Good. Good.
Yeah, that did very well. Yeah. Well, I don't see that we have any audience questions. We do have a comment from Paula Lee Milne. Says, "Love people where they are, as Jesus does." Is that one of yours, Diana?
Yeah, I volunteer. She's a great one.
Oh, great,
yeah.
Great. So.
That's awesome.
She says, "I love our Spanish interpreter." So.
We do have one. So we have a Latino community within. They have about 8 to 10. We have about 8 to 10 Latino speaking people. And for a long time, I was Google translating the bulletin that I hand out, but of course, Google translation doesn't do it like a Latino, like a Spanish speaking person would do it. But we finally decided to hire an interpreter. So he speaks while I'm speaking, and that has really opened up things nicely with our Latino community. But I think, if you think about others that are embedding, whether it's in the States or around the world, and I think people, who are called to lead a church like this, they have a sense of how God uses them, in what context, how God uses them. And to just step forward and build something around that. It doesn't have to follow anything prescribed, other than it has to be about Jesus, but I mean, the structure doesn't have to follow anything prescribed. It can be, God's such a creative God as it is anyway, right? That his churches are going to look unique, and he is going to move in ways that are going to be different from another. And when I first started, when I was trying to get started with this, I was fretting about, I got to build a team, and we just start meeting about this, and kind of, I kind of do like this planning period. Okay. And my mentors at the time, one of them was the executive pastor of a pretty good, 1,500, 2,000 member church here. And then the others were just some seasoned friends of mine, but they said, just start. Just start what you're doing. And so when we started, we had 7 people or whatever, and 4 of them were volunteers and 3 were some community members we happened to stumble across, or however it worked. It was just, but just start it. God builds it, you just start.
Diana, it sounds like at some point you guys probably had to transition from like casually sharing a meal with a group of people living on the streets and into a faith community. Is that like a fair?
No, I don't think so, James, because maybe we were always sharing, we were always praying, and we were always sharing the word, but I think you're right in the way of, like, last year was the first time we did baptisms.
Okay. So
yes, we matured as a faith community. I think that is where you're going.
Okay.
And again, I don't, for at least for Communitas Twin Cities, it didn't feel right to do until last year. And then when we did it, we had 8 people, which is a really good number for the size of our community, that wanted to be baptized. And we got an inflatable pool, and we put it in the parking lot of St. Mark's Church, and we did it there. But yes, so I think we are finally starting to grow deeper or mature as a faith community now. And we also, just in the last 6 months, started another meeting, which is a Bible study gathering. So we don't do a meal or anything at that one because we want to be more present with the people.
Mm.
And so, yes, that's another, piece of us maturing as a faith community. That's a good question, James. Yeah.
I think it's a part of the like process that's intimidating for people sometimes. Is that like I have a group of people that I'm like doing life with, in relationship with. What does it look like to start pursuing Jesus together?
Yeah.
Which it sounds like you guys has been like a gradual process for you guys, but also a really like beautiful process and something that's been fun to be part of.
It is. And with Jesus as the common denominator, it's kind of interesting because, again, these are folks that are not the ones that you are normally social construct, right? Us with them and them with us. But we're so genuinely excited to see one another and be together. And that just really says something, I think, about what God has done with our hearts in the context of this being a missional church, to this being this community, to this being this family kind of a thing. Yeah. Yeah. I think another thing, I'm just going to add this in. Personally, I come from my life has not been a fairy tale life. It's been it's had a lot of brokenness in it with family and marriage and all kinds of things. And I find, some of the most powerful times with the community where they really, really feel connected is when I share that with them. And we find our common ground a lot of times in that brokenness together. And then how Jesus has met us in it. So I think it's always really important to be very real as you're serving these communities and let them into your story. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Vulnerability.
That is so true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We definitely.
Well, yeah.
I was gonna say we definitely like invite, when we are willing to be vulnerable, we give people permission to be vulnerable. And I think there's just some affirmation in that when someone's like, yeah, it's been a hard day, it's been a hard year. There's like, oh, I'm not alone in going through those spaces. There's not something wrong with me going through those things.
Exactly.
What a beautiful thing to get to share with individuals living on the streets, where I think you're talking about that, like, you guys, that's two groups that don't often run together, and what a like powerful way to like bridge that divide.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been a really cool experience. There's no other way I'd want to do church. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't think we've got any other audience questions. Or do you got another one, James?
No. I was gonna wrap us up.
Okay. Good.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Dianna, thank you so much for sharing. I really enjoyed that. That was encouraging, and it's cool to hear stories of like the church thriving in, I think, just places that I'm removed from, and I often like don't get that picture.
Sure.
So I thank you for your voice and bringing that to us today. Next week, we're going to get to talk with Jody Hansen about criminal justice reform. we're really looking forward to that as well. So, all right, 2 weeks from now. So, Dianna, thank you again. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.